Right. Jamie, why don't you take the first one and then we'll go from there.
Oh yeah, there's tons. I'm actually doing some responses to some of the awesome questions here. Let me jump back to scroll up to where the first one came through. Okay, it looks like where are the comments coming from? Emails, Teams, messages. I think we answered that earlier, that you're getting the comments question, I think, was around how Glint is measuring or giving you some of that feedback.
Yeah, like the
that it's
count
from the
of
survey.
comments.
Right. And then, but we did have some follow-up questions on insights too. Let me scroll down a bit here. Okay, so there was a question for those on the recording. If your team has less than 5 people, does this feature not work for those managers? I believe that this was around the time when we were presenting Pulse. And so to answer that, yes, you do require 5 people minimum for your responses in order to evaluate those responses. And that is for a purpose, right? So that is so that we can anonymize them. So it's not like a functionality, or it's a feature, not not like a problem, right? It's a feature, not a bug, right? The fact that it needs 5 people. And so that's basically so that, if I did have a smaller team, I can make assumptions, right? I can kind of say, okay, that sounds like so-and-so, or if I only had one person who responded, obviously that would, and they tell me, yep, I responded. And I go, well, it looks like I only have one response and you're the only one who agreed. We don't want to be able to, target you. Go ahead, Richard.
It brings up a good point, right? So both Glint, it's really important that we can share these results. And when I say share, I mean as widely as we can, right? So obviously, if I'm a leader and I have 15 people that report to me, one indirectly or directly, doing a pulse like this, I want to be able to share as transparently what's going on there as possible. Now, what happens is all the default templates, when you create the questions and use them, they're designed in a way that you keep that anonymity. So people can give their responses, but you really can't insinuate like who said what. And those minimum sizes aren't just for, privacy. It's also about efficacy. So one of the things we've learned is when you have a really small team of people, it's actually pretty easy to keep up with, how people are with well-being, with a bunch of other factors. And we're talking about manager science 101 stuff, but there's a lot of ways to do that. Where the gap often is when you start to scale that. So in this example, maybe you have, 2 sub-managers or managers that are supporting 2 smaller teams, and then you're leading that broader community of 15 people. This is where a lot of times, if we don't ask these questions periodically, we might be missing signal data. And one of the things that we found in pilots with a lot of customers when we explore these is, from a top-down perspective, we get a certain number of responses, et cetera. The response rate is much higher with these types of pulse surveys than what you get with the employee experience, broader organizational surveys. And it makes sense because, people feel that it can be actioned by their manager or a leader, or skip level 1 or 2 levels up. But, it's much harder, to feel like it's going to be actioned by the whole org, right? And when you think of especially a larger organization. And so what we find is that increase of both visibility in follow-up and this idea that we can, as a team of 15 or whatever, figure out ways to improve these things and make a meaningful difference, and then measure it and then see if, did we make that meaningful difference over time? Those all, compound together to drive not just adoption, obviously, of this technology and its usage, but the real impact it can have. So, while the number of users is certainly something to always talk about for like the groupings, kind of trust the behavioral research and other things from Microsoft. It's not just for privacy. There's really good efficacy reasons that you want to lean into some of their models, including using some of their templates. Like some of the templates are really well thought out because they do rankings like 1 to 5, which is really helpful for over time seeing trends, right? And again, it's not about being 5 out of 5. That's really, if you're going to message this to those leaders, it's important to be like, no, what we're really just trying to show is it trending positive or is it trending negative? That's really what we want to address.
Yeah. And then just to kind of highlight, like if you are looking for surveys on smaller teams like that are less than 5. Jamie did mention this in the chat, but you can use things like Microsoft Forms. You're not going to get all the kind of analytics and insight, but it does give you a way to kind of send out quick surveys to the team and just get quick responses if you have a small team that's not available to use in Pulse.
Lovely.
Yeah, and I just added a little bit of an answer, which it's tough to do this in a short way without like misrepresenting it. Hence why I gave too much context in the beginning, because I know that it's again, to Richard's point, is like these are very robust tools and they've been around a long time. And so we're trying to make them more accessible. But the thing with Glint Pulse and Insights is kind of like the when and why you'd use some of them, right? So the Glint would be, I just kind of did a summary there. Glint would be large scale org level surveys. Short and sweet. It's the majority of why I use it. There's a lot of other use cases. In fact, something I didn't mention this here, but for those that may have an account executive here at Microsoft, I know that we do have some additional resources where sometimes we can actually tap the shoulder of our Microsoft HR teams and even have discussions with you to talk about like how Microsoft has like our own HR journey, our own transformation journey, how we've used these tools and like decisions that we made, like the whys behind what we've done. Is you get to learn from a company like us who, like, the why we built this was also to serve our own organization. So much of our own product comes from what we're learning about running Microsoft that we end up feeding it back in and go, whoa, what a huge use case to learn about. Not only are we doing research beyond ourselves, but within. And so, yeah, Glint is going to be that tool that helps you do that larger scale. Pulse is going to be that sort of, hey, we want to give the power of something like Glint, but something that suits a smaller scale, right? So giving managers, like I said, mentors, peers, even if we want to do something like the ability to say, just ask your team, hey, we've been collaborating a lot. Why do I have to only let my manager do it? Maybe I want to start taking on more of a leadership position. I say, hey, I want to take some initiative and start asking the team really effective questions, or maybe I own something else internally. So it's just saying that, hey, these tools are powerful. Let's provide this to you. And then with Insights, it's looking at, like I said, the indirect signals, right? So basically, I did actually link in the chat there, and for those on the recording, there's a document that we published that is called metric definitions. And this basically tells you exactly what Viva Insights is using to measure your interactivity, right? So a lot of people think, they get concerned when they start to hear this. Like I said early on, we don't know when you're in a meeting and you move to another monitor and you're opening a PowerPoint. That doesn't mean multitasking. You know what I mean? That kind of thing means that you're probably doing something that is contributing to this meeting. That's something right now. We have this PowerPoint open. I've got my browser open. We're not tracking your mouse. What we're caring about are what are things that you are doing that we know are things that take a certain amount of mental energy and effort and attention. So I know that things like responding to an email requires me to focus on that email. If I'm in a meeting at the same time I'm sending emails, that probably means my attention is split. I can't be focusing on the meeting and sending an email. And so obviously there's even nuance there, hence why we aggregate and we look at this and we look at trends, right? But for the most part, those are two examples of like, we look at the signal itself and we measure it, and then we leverage these out of the box templates to say, hey, again, we've been able to understand how to splice this data in a way that we can learn from it and a way we can understand it.
There's a really important thing, since I know I can be a little bit more direct on this than what probably Microsoft can. I think productivity monitoring has a lot of negative connotations. I think well-deserved ones. Personally, I do not approve of productivity monitoring as a professional. It's something that has a problem because it's not designed to be supportive. It's designed to be, we can describe that some other time. So the design of Insights, Glint, all these tools, Pulse, they're meant to be supportive first, which means that they're additive. So think about it like this, these activities are all occurring. What's the difference, just like with AI, the difference is some people in your organization, they know how to use these tools. So if you're really clever, you could look at things like SharePoint activity and see like, oh, this document was checked in, this document was modified, this was happening over here. And I could get a feel for what my team's been up to without ever asking them questions, right? Like, where are you with document X? You don't really need to ask that question. Between Copilot and, of course, SharePoint signals, we already have that. The problem is most employees don't know how to use those signals because not everyone is digitally fit or excellent in those particular areas. And so what Insights does is it gives those wonderful, wonderful, rich, useful, actionable signals of information, and it empowers people individually. So that's the personal insights on the left here. and it empowers them as teams and leaders. And so one of the things that I do find a lot of customers worry about, they're like, well, we haven't really deployed insights, or even they have enabled insights for personal, but they never championed it. And before Copilot came along, I would have argued that the biggest impact you could have to improve workplace productivity is to just help people understand the insights they have access to already, within email, within, Teams meetings, within those spaces they already work. And so even when we pilot premium capabilities like team and leader insights, it's really important that we, alongside those in parallel, are really championing those personal insights, because those personal insights are seeded, they're free, everyone has access to them without even getting into the premium scenarios, and they do deliver a lot of value because they're supportive, not what productivity monitoring represents, which I'm trying to use elegant words versus my very strong opinions against. So just wanted to share that.
Another thing I like to comment on that in terms of measuring this stuff, we've been talking a lot. I think there's a tendency to have like a more like critical type of language around it, like highlighting like, oh, we're seeing bad metrics, high things here, this is bad, but that's not really true. What we realize is that it's not about only measuring what's bad. It's about looking at the whole picture and then realizing, hey, there might be people who are doing this super well in the organization. How do I connect the people who are having challenges and say, whoa, for some reason, like I'm seeing really good metrics for some of these other people. Let's go ask those people, hey, leader, what are you doing in this org as a manager to get like really good, healthy work-life balance, and to get, people are responding that they're really fulfilled in your organization. And we're seeing a correlation of like, hey, there's way more one-on-one time with the managers. I know we keep using that example, but it shows to be impactful regardless, right? Other things could be like, you have better connections amongst your network. So it seems like not even just one-on-one time, but these individuals are better connected across the organization on their own, right? So you're able to see some of that tangible data along with those who are doing unsuccessfully, and say, hey, how can we mirror that? How can we scale what works? Again, and like learning of learning about how people are working successfully internally without everything having to come from the top. There's so much you can learn the other direction and then go, awesome, now let's push this out and push out what works, right? And that it's an already understanding of the culture of your company, and the hurdles are a lot less. It's just kind of mirroring activity and everything.
More frequent signals for sure, and deeper.
Yeah.
There's a question about some of the data and just privacy. Again, I know this is such an important topic, so maybe we could briefly talk about it. So in this visual here, you can see we have things like different teams, and they have comments and things like that. So the question basically was, hey, I'm a little concerned because I know that we have org data that we overlay with this. We already talked about like mostly remote, mostly on site. These data sets that we're describing, you basically import them. There's different ways to do it, but you're basically pulling that data in. And that can include things like job titles or concepts of that nature. One of the things that the concern was, well, what if, how do you protect people from being able to focus and filter down on a particular job role or something like that, where, you can kind of break some of those anonymity barriers or create risk. And the truth is, it's actually designed built in. Like you cannot surpass that. Trust me, we've tried to jailbreak this a million times. So one of the scenarios you can do is, when you're looking, and if I'm trying to filter down, think of any set of refiners you can imagine, because there's so many different ways. It could be on comments, it could be in Viva Insights, it could be in analytics in Viva Amplify, which is a whole different discussion. There's a layer you can get down to, but once you start to reach smaller sizes for populations, it won't allow you to continue. So it'll say, I don't have enough of a population for you to do this kind of analysis you're trying to do. And to the noise signaling that was mentioned earlier, what it basically does is, the system, knows that the message should be like, this is going to be a 5 out of 10 score or something based on this average statistic. And so what it does is, instead of giving, this person did a 7 and this person did a 3 and so on and so forth, it adds noise to that, which still results in the same average, right? So whatever data point you're trying to get, what they do is they, as you get really small, we're not talking about everything, just when you get into those narrower ones, like 10, 15 people, they actually do add this AI like noise to it that doesn't change the number, but makes it impossible for you to identify it. And again, the point of that is because people shouldn't be trying to zero into that level. It's not the point. The point is to talk about the population. Again, it's to talk about the cohort, not the individuals. And that's a good lesson actually for a lot of managers, because a lot of these leaders and managers, as we cross this digital divide and shift to hybrid work, it's really important that we start to work in these more programmatic ways, because then we can scale and we can be effective. And then when it does require that human touch, when it does require that deeper dive, that's the manager working to, with their relationship, working with those individuals. And, that's, I think, where the technology should kind of take a backstage seat, because, those are best dealt with by, human interactions than even Copilot ones today. So, yeah, great comment on the sidebar. I hope that answered that question around, in particular, the structure of some of that data and how some of those privacy scenarios work.
Yeah, and also I'll drop into the chat as well, but those on the recording, we not only document like how the technology works, right? So if you go to learn.microsoft.com, you'll see all of our materials around this, and especially around the insight side and Glint, there's tons of information that we provide so that you can see exactly how we approach this from the technology side of things, but also, thank you, Richard. I was just going to do the same thing, but also how we do this from like a, like our approach, right? And so I think things like in the, yeah, I pulled up some of the metric customization here, but there's an area on, I think, privacy and data protection. So in the top left of the index, a little bit up. Yeah, there you go. There's stuff like that. So it's telling you like how we actually approach this from a technical perspective, privacy guide for admins. So there's also information. It's like, hey, we want you to be able to tell your end users exactly what's being measured. And so they're not freaked out. We get that all the time. They're like, this is awesome, but good luck getting my employees to not do like a strike and boycott working every day, because they're worried about it. And so the great thing is we give you the language, it's all really, plain and normal descriptions, exactly how we are measuring this, and that our like, it's really to say that like, this is for you, right? This is for you, because ultimately if your organization is able to measure this, this type of thing, like it's intended to come back to serve you as the employee, because really what would the company be without you, and vice versa, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship. So making sure that they're happy is making sure that everyone's happy and that everything flows really well, so they can see that it's really not to target anybody. And that's, in fact, in a lot of our language, really explicit that that's what we care about.
Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah.
Just kind of looking through some of these sidebar discussions there.
I'm seeing some stuff.
One thing I'll note while we're kind of working through that, I think a lot of people, we get hung up on the advanced insights. And I also, I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges when you pilot technologies like Viva, and you're trying to work through specifically Viva Insights with the organization, we talked about pilots earlier. One of the big struggles is like, how do we know what we're going to get, right? So you come in and you say, well, I want to improve meeting effectiveness, and that's what I'm going to use Viva Insights for. Or I want to improve, how networked and connected our employees are, and I'm going to use the data, around everything from onboarding to employee connection and networking, especially with an M&A or some other event that happened. And so, you come in with some objectives, and I think that's really healthy. I think if you're approaching something like these tools, it's always good to come in like, hey, we have an annual survey coming up. These are our objectives, is what we're trying to answer these questions, et cetera. But it's really, really, and I can't stress this enough, it's really important to acknowledge you don't know what the data will tell you. And if you just use these tools in the most basic, configurations possible, basically out of the box, if you use these tools, it will give you signal data that will create completely different priorities and questions, because you may find that there are very particular risks that you didn't have on your radar, right? There are problems in your business, potentially like indicators that there is great opportunities. And so it's almost always better to go in and say, we want to keep this cost of this engagement, using these tools as low as possible, because we're just trying to get more data so we can plan for next fiscal or whatever it is for, our AI transformation, for our, divestitures and mergers and acquisitions or other things. We want to understand our business better, And so let's use this data to gather that. And while I'm going to get in trouble for this because it's recorded, you can buy Viva Insights for a little bit of time and then stop paying for it. You just buy it for a little bit and get a point in time. It's not great because it's very time sensitive, but that's still better than not having this data, because then it might take you a couple weeks or months to figure out like what that really tells you, but then that can really empower you for, oh, this is why it's so important for us to sustain these new toolings, these new employee experience capabilities, because it's going to help us action so many of these scenarios. And so again, you kind of, it's cart or horse, right? You of course have pain points in the business that will drive these investments, but if you think you don't have them, I promise using these tools will help you understand just how relevant and maybe even prevalent they are within your business as well. So I thought that would be a really good thing to highlight as well, because it's a very common pain point. We've all been there where we're doing the business case writing, and there's so many things it could do and could tell us, and of course there's some really safe bets on there, but certainly give yourself that room where after those first few weeks there's probably a whole set of new pivot points that you want to intelligently talk through as a business to prioritize.
And if I could just I know we're quite over here, but something on that is the highlighting the fact that it's over time. I think that that's something, again, we keep measuring like, oh, what are you doing today? But then that's great. But that's just your first, to Richard's point, that's like your first iteration. It's your first introduction to maybe learning more of things you didn't even know to ask, that it's surfacing to you, right? And I think that's the key thing that in the beginning, why I gave so much so much context early on, is because a lot of people, because they're not data experts, because they're not sort of people scientists, they don't even know necessarily how to tap into the bigger picture. They don't even know what to ask, right? In fact, that's part of the challenge. What's really funny about Copilot is people saying, this is awesome, but when they first start using generative AI, they go, I don't even know what to ask this tool. So we've built in these sort of prompt suggestions, right, to give you an idea, get the juices flowing. And it's the same concept with these, is that like initial baseline, you start to go, whoa, like things you didn't even imagine about your business. And that's kind of everyone's first reaction when they start running these just out of the box reports, right? And then, or even understanding what they can measure, and it starts to get the gears going. But what's really great is, okay, so now we have Viva Insights and Glint and all this stuff, and now we have Copilot. Now, how are we using these visible tools to see how the implementation of these changes are going? So maybe you make a data-driven decision and you're like, cool, we can see that Glint said this and that Insight said this. So now here's the action we're going to take. Okay, well, in 6 months, did it do what you wanted it to do?
Right.
And now it's showing it to you.
Expectations are so low, right? Most of us only do employee engagement surveys once a year before we use tools like this and realize we can both be targeted, so we can get some groups in the business doing more frequently. Like we can run these more frequently because the data is immediately usable. We can share that data more readily, which increases people's contributions to it. Like so much changes when you have, the technology should never lead a change, but technology empowers new cultural narratives and paradigms that aren't achievable without it. And I think, whether you're using Microsoft Stack or not, investing in the employee experience so that it doesn't feel like, hey, employee engagement is something we can throw some money at, but it's not really going to change, or some of these other, metrics that are related. These are things that really can change with really simple nudging. Like, if you're familiar with like those science techniques, right? You just have to nudge behaviors ever so slightly and you can get some really significant productivity gains. And like I said before, obviously with Copilot, we're seeing 60%, 120% productivity gains. Like, Insights was never going to drive that, I'll be frank. But, before it, I would say it was the best investment, because when you start to use tools like Insights and Glint, we were able to get even richer data. Great highlight to talk about the Adoption Center next.
Yeah, I just thought, yeah, as we're talking about this, I know we highlighted it out loud, but the thing about walking through this, I think is, so our adoption site has a bunch of stuff, but this one, when you look at the Viva section, we do break this down by module. I know we've said it, but I don't think we've walked through and actually showed you. And so what I love is drilling into each of these, you're going to see things like, for example, Viva Insights is going to give you a way to look through, okay, here's the adoption resources like in general, here are those privacy resources. So linking you to some of that content to address those concerns, right? Microsoft Stories, eBooks. But these are awesome because it gives you ways to communicate to your end user, but also like what a good looks like, right? What a good day in the life for personal insights. I think it helps take an understanding of, okay, I understand conceptually what this tool is supposed to do, but like I need to understand tangibly, like how do I translate this to something that I understand, but also how my managers and my employees and then my leaders also understand how they can contribute. And so we've put together a lot of this, and same thing for Glint, right? So really for all these modules, and the good thing is it's very consumable, in my opinion. This is all meant to be something that really anybody should be able to interact with. It's not, the mental gymnastics that someone who's super already very familiar with the tool is going to see. It's like, this is meant to help you on the long term of your journey and get updated as the tools transform. And then just one thing I wanted to highlight too is at the top of this section, there's some really cool things around like how we're informing you on like the thought leadership side of things. So things like, again, we've mentioned the work trend index a lot, so like where we're sourcing a lot of the research that we're using for like these conversations and how we understand impact. This is here. The Josh Burson Employee Experience Assessment is pretty cool too. I think it can just help give you sort of a picture of where you're at today, and then more guides, etc. But I love that it breaks it down here too. So, okay, how do I now engage my organization? Like, what do I do to start getting them to build these tools? How I now train them? And then you can see things like best practices, connecting communities. So I think Richard, awesome, yesterday mentioned things like the champion programs, kind of like gamifying a championship a little bit. And so getting people to adopt effectively internally. Anyway, just had to push this because this continues to be kind of a haven and a really invaluable resource. Whether you are working with a partner or not, you should always have publicly available sources, from a vendor directly. And that's really our goal, is to make sure that you're able to constantly learn the way that we're learning, right? We want to feed that right back to our customer base.